Hi guys, here's another little tutorial on painting the watercolor nude. So I'm using primary cyan, Alazarin Crimson, and Gamboge, which is a really nice yellow shade. You don't need to use a blue as warm as cyan. An ultramarine would work really nice here. I just don't have any ultramarine on hand. Then I'm using Alazarin artboard, and I'm going to be sketching out the figure using a B pencil, but I would recommend using a very high H pencil because we don't want to see these drafting marks in the final painting. So I'll make them dark enough just so that they show up on the screen. But when you're drawing along with this, try to make them much more light than what I'm doing here. Okay, so let's get started with the draft. Now I'm going to create a shape that's roughly going to encircle the figure, or wrap up the figure, I mean. We don't need to commit to these angles that we're putting down early on, but it's easier to measure angles than it is to kind of move around a fully formed shape. So that's why I'm just sort of gonna create a space to carve the figure out. And I'm gonna start with the head. So let's get the outer angle, the hairline, and then I'm going to draw an angle that's going to show the outside of the face. And I want to make sure I'm working across the figure as I put these details in so I don't get too kind of bogged down on any detail which might throw my proportion off. So the angle of the arm coming forward is going to be something like this. Moving into the torso, so let's see, we've got a bit of a neck, and her leg is going to be intersecting her arm around here with this angle. Let's move up, so she's just going to be kind of resting her nose on her knee. So let's get that kneecap. Moving down with the angle of the front leg, and I'm just going to draw a line. This is going to show where her wrist is going to be and her upper hand. And then the crease in her leg is going to be around here, so I'm just going to kind of follow through and complete this leg. So since she's leaning kind of away from us, she's going to be seated kind of at an angle. There's a bit of foreshortening where her leg's kind of going to be a bit wider, the front one, where it's coming towards us with perspective. So let's box out the shape of her front foot. Just going to get the hand that's going to come over her foot, so boxing this out. Then her her leg kind of going away from us. It's going to come out around here. We've got upper part of this leg, and then let's move into her foot, which is facing away, carving out the angle of her heel. I'm just going to do a circle where her ankle is. And I'll get in some detail on the stool that she's seated on. And then this leg is on sort of a plinth, so she's going to be kind of sitting on two different things. And now I'm going to move into the face. I'm going to bring this a little bit closer to her leg. And draw a line for the angle of the eyebrows, the eyes, the bottom of the nose, which is going to be pressed against the leg, and the bottom of the lips. And from here, I can start to carve out the details of the face. So just going to carve out the nose with these spots we have here. Now the sides of the nose are going to align with the inner corners of the eyes. So just moving up from there, I'm gonna get an eye down and then up towards the lip. So let's get the upper lip. The sides of the lips are going to roughly align with where the pupils are going to be. And from here, I can carve out the chin. So let me just get this shape down. Whoops. And moving up the jawline. To where her ear is going to be. So the upper part of the ear is a little bit higher than her eyebrow. And now let's get some of this hair in. The neck. The other side of her chest. So just kind of going to see a tiny bit coming through the leg there. And I'm just going to refine the details of this knee coming up just a little bit. And then I'm going to just carve out the back so that this slant is a bit less severe. And I'm actually going to draw out the areas of highlight. So just very, very lightly, because we're going to need to keep these really safe as we're painting. Okay, so we're going to have a highlight kind of around her forehead. And you might want to, if you have masking fluid, which is this kind of glue-like substance you can put down on the highlighted areas, you can use that to keep your highlights clean. I'm going to mark out, she's going to have a highlight kind of coming over her shoulder and like a little bit here where her collarbone is going to show. And then coming down the arm, the highlight's going to kind of move with her muscles. And you don't need to commit to these drafting lines. That's the thing. You might find while you're working that, you need to alter the placement of one thing or the other. That's absolutely fine. That's, why these are for drafting. You don't need to like sketch out the highlights like I'm doing here before you're painting. I'm just doing this to keep things simple. But another way of doing this would be to use white chalk on the areas of highlight before you put the paint down. And so the paint will go over the white chalk and keep these areas light. But with watercolor nudes, watercolor portraits, we kind of have to bring our values up. So we need to bring the like overall darkness of whatever we're looking at higher than it actually is in reality, because watercolors are so light. So you kind of have to do some editing in your mind and some choices in terms of how dark your darkest areas are going to be. Sorry, I'm just carving out the leg a little bit here. How dark your darkest areas are going to be and how light your lightest areas are going to be. And that's a decision that's not necessarily simply based on what your reference is. With oils or acrylics, you can approximate, or even gouache, fairly well the actual colors of the figure. With watercolors, the thing that makes them exciting and kind of fun to play around with, but also very challenging, is that you need to kind of be doing your own mental Photoshop, where you're bringing up the highlights, bringing up the values from where they actually are and making them fit within the confines of how dark your watercolors are going to be. because at a certain point you don't want to be layering on like super, super thick watercolors because you might as well use gouache at that point. And there's going to be a bit of light coming down where her belly is creased. Okay, so let's start. I'm going to start with the lightest value. So I'm going to mix together a good amount of, let me just make sure this water is clean. Okay, so I've got clean water and I am going to mix together some of this crimson and gamboge, so heavier on the crimson. And I'm going to make this first layer very, 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 very light. So what I'm doing here is doing the lightest halftone. So the halftone is the brightest area of the subject that isn't the highlight. So I'm going to just add quite a bit of water so I don't have to keep making this. It's a good idea to have a piece of the paper that you're using on hand to test your colors out as you go along, and just so you can kind of monitor what they're drying to, so what color they're going to be. So, okay, I'm going to make a lot of this. I'm going to try not to make it too yellow. That's maybe a bit too red. I'm just going to add in more water and a tiny bit more yellow. That'll do. Okay, and now I'm just going to kind of create a really even layer of the second lightest color. This could use a little bit more yellow. So what's useful about, instead of just going straight into buying an earth tone like a burnt sienna, but rather making these colors yourself, is that you can, on a finer level, finer tune, how cool or warm your tones are going to be as you move along. So red, yellow, and blue will create just about any color. And what's useful about having them separately is that you can create more nuance within the figure. So I'm just going to go with this lightest halftone. I'm adding more water just because it's going to get very light as it moves down the arm. And then just, I'm wetting my brush and applying just water to the edges of the paint I've put down so that it blends into the highlights. Okay, that's maybe a bit too much. I've maybe put down a bit too much water because I can see it's making that cauliflower effect. No worries, while the paint is wet, you can still move it around. So if you've put too much paint down in one area, you can always just very quickly move it into another area. So you can kind of use your paper as your palette to a certain degree. And I'll show you another thing that you can do. So instead of just leaving the highlights, so like on this leg, another way to approach the lighter areas with watercolors, and you can make a much smoother gradient this way, although it's a bit more difficult, is to put your color down. And in just a moment, I'm going to get you can use either a paper towel for this, or, because I like to have a bit of control, a kind of sturdier brush. So I'm just going to use a flat brush here and to pick up the excess color. So I'm like pulling away the lighter areas. My brush has a bit of blue on it. That's why it's kind of a little bit muddy. But this can create a nice kind of gradient, and it's okay because I'm going to be making this area darker anyway. Okay. I'll do that again, except this time with a paper towel up here, just to kind of show what that effect is. And you can actually do the whole figure kind of in that way, where you're just, instead of preserving your highlights, very quickly pulling off the areas of highlight. But it does take away some of the control. So it's kind of like a, payoff. You lose some of the control, but you can create more dynamic gradients. And I'm just kind of wiping my paintbrush on the side to keep it from just getting too inundated with paint. So you don't want like too much water on your page, or you'll get that kind of cauliflower blossom effect. Just going to add a little bit more yellow to this mixture as I move around the highlights within the torso. And then back to just a bit more of that crimson. To the best of your ability, you want to try to minimize the amount of brush strokes that you use. So the more brush strokes you put down, the messier the paint tends to get. So we want to just keep these minimal, and that's where using kind of the largest brush for the task is really useful. And I'm going to carefully move into the face and the neck. Let me just get this. Just going to paint everywhere that's not the highlight. Just blending the paint down here. Okay, and now I'm going to do kind of the second or third lightest areas. I'm going to make a thicker mixture of Gamboge and Alazarin Crimson, but also just put a speck of blue in there, so just like a tiny amount. test it out. Okay, and I'm gonna get some of these shadows down and then blend them outward. So we're gonna have a shadow coming down all this side of her back. And it's gonna kind of wrap around her shoulder. And I'm going to be careful here just to kind of blend this color outward. So I'm adding a little bit more of that Gamboge and Alazarin Crimson mixture without the blue on the edges. I'm just going to put a little bit of pure blue now on the underside of this arm. Moving in, I'm going to put a little bit of that Alazarin Crimson and Gamboge in this little corner here, just so there's variation within the darker areas. Just adding in a little bit more blue as we move into the shade. And a little bit of crimson and yellow. So I'm working in wet paint, which is why I'm kind of being a little bit more nitpicky on a spot by spot basis rather than putting the color straight down. The challenge here is you can build up watercolors just by doing, lightest layer, second lightest layer, third lightest layer. But you run the risk of your paper getting over inundated. So working on a spot by spot basis can sometimes be a better idea than just adding more layers. So I'm going to make more of a pure Gamboge and Alazarin Crimson mixture. Blend this forward. Now I'm just gonna, with a wet brush, control this gradient a bit more. So I'm just moving in, picking up some of the excess paint. And using it to create a gradient on the leg. And I can always pick up any excess, again, with a wet brush or a paper towel. Okay, I'm going to add some more blue to do the darkest part of the shadow right here. Oops, it's very purpley, so I'm just going to add more red. And then to blend, I'm just adding a bit more water to my brush. Okay, so let's leave this to dry for a little bit. I'm just gonna get like a really dilute mix of that cool color. Before moving on, so I'm gonna use a clean well, since this is getting very muddy, to mix together some more of that Alazarin Crimson and Gamboge. Before getting the lower leg. Okay, and I'm gonna add a little bit more Alazarin Crimson to get the underside of this leg. So she's gonna be slightly more in the shade on that side than on this side. So when we get the background, these skin tones might make a little bit more sense. Oops. Not going to overdo it with the details in the feet, just because there isn't really enough space. I'm just getting some pure blue here for the underside of the foot. So in areas where you see cool tones coming through, but that aren't necessarily darker than the surrounding skin, you can use a pure little bit of blue or purple. And let's get this foot here. So while I have the blue, I'm just going to go straight in with the outer side of the toe. And then back to my Gamboge and Alazarin Crimson mixture. Oops, it's a bit too much paint. Some more of that kind of darker purpley mixture to put underneath the hand. Oh, that's cauliflowering. So this is what we don't want. This is what happens when we put too much water down. You get like all these kind of cauliflower shapes. I don't really mind them that much. I think they add kind of interest to the painting. If you're using a water medium, it's nice to have like a little bit of a hint about the medium that you're using within the painting, but they're not so nice when you don't have control of them. So I'm just gonna smooth that out a bit, and once I put the background down, I'll be able to even out these colors a bit more, but I've got to let that dry. And let's get the underside of the leg. And I'm just going to use a bit of blue for the underside of the arm. now I'm going to make just a little bit, put a little bit more of that gamboge, that yellow into the mixture, because I want to come back in on some of these highlights on the arm. So I'm just going kind of in the lightest areas with a little bit more yellow, just to smooth this transition a bit more and add just like a little bit more warmth. And once this section is dry, I'll be able to kind of refine the details around here by working on dry paper. So getting those creases and curves a little bit more defined. Oof. And let's get this area here. So I'm just gonna add more of that cool tone. Just a bit more blue for where the arm's gonna be. And in order to let these details dry a bit and also to understand the skin tone a bit more, I'm now going to add in the background. So I will just kind of speed this part up. And I'm going to do a darker blue on this side, moving into a lighter blue on this side. Oh, and just to note, one thing you might want to do just to make the process easier of doing a background is you can wet down your paper, but just be very cautious of not letting your background bleed into your painting. Right, so now that I have put in the background and my paint is a bit drier, I'm going to start to just very carefully put in the details of the face with a very fine brush. So let me just get my finest brush on hand. I'm just going to use this. And I'm going to mix together kind of a warm purple color. So a little bit of blue, mainly crimson, and a little bit of that yellow. And I'm not going to dilute this too much. So let's start. I'm just going to get the shadow moving across the outside of her forehead. Moving on to the shadow made by her eyebrows and her upper eye. Then the shadow made on her cheek. And her lower lip and jaw. I'm just going to blend this out a little bit with a tiny smidge of Alazarin Crimson. So wet brush, just blending into the lighter areas a little bit. And I'm actually going to wash this over the eye. So I've colored in most of the eye just with a very dilute kind of darker mix. And now I'm going to mix together some Alazarin Crimson and Gamboge to do kind of the middle lightest points on the face. So if you're just starting painting watercolor nudes, I would recommend getting a reference where you don't see a lot of the face, just because the frustrating thing about nudes can be that no matter how much work you put on in the figure, our eye is always going to be naturally drawn to the face. So if you're working on a small scale like I am, where there's not a lot of room for variation within the face, it can kind of set you up for difficulty. So just getting the shadow of the jawline, which is a little bit warmer. And I'm going to put like a little bit more crimson kind of around the ears. And a little bit more of that shadow color where the hairline's going to come. I'm going to blend a tiny bit of just Gamboge into the highlight on the nose. And I'll let that dry while I move into the hair. So I'm just going to get some pure Alazarin Crimson, which I'm going to paint around the highlights in the hair. So just going to mark off where those are going to be. Now I'm going to mix a little bit of yellow into that crimson mix. Now I'm going to make a much darker color, so almost purple, just using a lot of blue and Alazarin Crimson. Maybe a touch of yellow just to turn it into more of a brownish color, but kind of like a dark brownish purple. I'm going to just get the low lights here. So I'm actually going to bring the background in around there, I think, in just a bit. I'll put down the hair, and then any details on the outside of the figure that I need to edit, I can do so by simply bringing the background into the painting. Just very carefully carving out the outer corner of the face and the knee. And I'm going to get some kind of wispier, lighter hairs around the outside of the head by mixing together an orange using that crimson and crimson and gamboge. And I'm just going to come in with some pure blue just to kind of move the background in just a little bit. And now is what I find to be the fun part, which is where I'm going to go in on the dried paint and just tighten up all the details. So I'm just going to use that really kind of dark brown that I've made. It's more blue based. So I'll put a bit more red in it and a bit more gamboge. Just a bit more, so just mix this up. Okay, now with a concentrated amount of paint, I'm gonna mark out like the areas that are very well defined in the shadows. Get the creases on the stomach. And the shadow on the leg. So the darkest points are essentially carving out the lightest points on the figure. I'm also going to mix together just some pure Gamboge and Alazarin Crimson to cut off the leg from this arm here, so just so that there's more of a defined transition. And there's going to be a bit more shading on this lower leg. And I'm going to use the background to kind of carve out the areas on her back that I want straightened up a little bit. get a purple shadow that she's kind of sitting on. Bit more detail in the shadow on the seat. And a little bit more shadow just kind of to straighten up the transition to the calf here. And then on to the hands, I'm going to tidy up these details. So I'm going to make a purple using my very fine brush. And a very concentrated amount of paint. So here I'm just sort of finessing the shadows, moving in with a little bit more blue. So carving out the hands from the negative space. And let's carve out the wrist from the little shadow it's going to make. And I'm just going to kind of separate this leg, define it a bit. And I want a bit more definition around the neck. So I'm going to come in with Alazarin Crimson and Gamboge to just get this shadow a bit more well-defined. And then I'm going to come in with kind of like a blue mixture just to straighten up the back. I want a bit of a softer transition within the shadow on the abdomen, so I'm just going to come back there, add this in, get a little bit of pure alizarin for the nipple, and then just get some blue to fill in the space in the background that I've missed. And I realize there's also a space in the background that I've missed here that I'm just going to very finely add in. Still feel there can be a little bit more definition on the underside of the arm, so just I'm going to move in there with a little bit of Alazarin Crimson and Gamboge. And now is kind of the trickiest part, which is putting in the final details in the face and just trying not to get the paint to go anywhere where it's not supposed to. So I'm going to make a kind of reddish color for the eyebrows, reddish brown. Just going to darken the eyelashes. I'll get a little shadow on the underside of the nose. And I'm just going to do a really dilute amount of blue that I'm going to put in the space where the eye white would be. Oops. And I'm going to just carefully carve out the lower portion of the face from the dark. Since it's the arm, I need to warm this color up a little bit. So I've added just a bit of crimson and gamboge to the mix of the shaded arm that's kind of coming forwards. And now we'll do the lips again with just a bit more Alazarin Crimson. I feel like it's missing something around the eyes, so I'm just gonna get it a little bit darker, kind of closer to the bit of shading on the nose. I'm trying to avoid just going straight in and doing the iris and details like that, because this brush is, even though it's fine, there's only so many details you can get. So you want to look for what are the bigger shadows? What are the biggest shadows that you can see in a certain area? And the shadow kind of near the nose is bigger than the shape of the iris. So to get more definition, instead of just, painting the subject, I kind of paint around the subject. Okay, and now I've got to kind of darken the hair on this side. I'm going to go in again and just tighten up some of the details. Now that the paint's drying, I can kind of see how the final color is going to be, and I'm just going to make some refinements. And I guess I will put in just a splotch for the iris, just so it's there. I feel like there could be a little bit more of a shadow underneath the chin. And something's unsettling me a bit about the shoulders, so I'm just going to carve the shoulders inwards a little bit more by just bringing the background further into the figure. Okay, realized I need a little shadow underneath this foot. And to bring the hair down a little bit more into the figure. So I'm going to mix together just kind of a reddish brown. Okay, and I'm just going to kind of solidify the background here a little bit, and then I think I'll call it on this one. But once you get kind of the initial tones down, you can do a lot more kind of fine editing working on dry paper. So this stage in the process can either be short or it can last a long time. You have a lot of freedom once your paints are dry, essentially, to go into detail. see what's missing. Yep, I just forgot a bit of a crease in the shoulder. So let me get that. I'm going to move the shading a little bit down on the shoulder as well. I'm just going to move inwards around here. Okay, and I will need to make myself stop because I could just sort of keep going and going and going. But yeah, hopefully this was helpful. Share your work. We're at Soho_life_drawing on Instagram. And if you have any questions, just put them in the comments. We'd love to see your work.